The war in the Vendée was an uprising in the Vendée region of France during the French Revolution. The Vendée is a coastal region, located immediately south of the Loire River in western France. Initially, the war was similar to the 14th-century Jacquerie peasant uprising, but quickly acquired themes considered by the government in Paris to be counter-revolutionary and royalist. The uprising, headed by the self-styled Catholic and Royal Army, was comparable to the Chouannerie, which took place in the area north of the Loire. The departments included in the uprising, called the Vendée Militaire, included the area between the Loire and the Laon rivers. Vendée, part of Maine-et-Loire west of the Laon, and the portion of Deux-Chèvres west of the river Thouet. Having secured Épées, the deficiencies of the Vendéan army became more apparent. Lacking a unified strategy and fighting a defensive campaign, from April onwards the army lost cohesion and its special advantages. Successes continued for some time. Thouars was taken in early May and Saumur in June. There were victories at Châtillon and Vithiers. After this string of victories, the Vendéens turned to a protracted siege of Nantes, for which they were unprepared and which stalled their momentum, giving the government in Paris sufficient time to send more troops and experienced generals. Tens of thousands of civilians, Republican prisoners, and sympathizers with the revolution were massacred by both armies, leading to modern descriptions of the uprising and its consequences as a genocide. Ultimately, the uprising was suppressed using draconian measures. The historian François Furet concludes that the repression in the Vendée not only revealed massacre and destruction on an unprecedented scale but also a zeal so violent that it has bestowed as its legacy much of the region's identity. The war aptly epitomizes the depth of the conflict between religious tradition and the revolutionary foundation of democracy. Background: class differences were not as great in the Vendée as in Paris or in other French provinces. In the rural Vendée, the local nobility seems to have been more permanently in residence and less bitterly resented than in other parts of France. Alexis de Tocqueville noted that most French nobles lived in cities by 1789. An intendant's survey showed one of the few areas where they still lived with the peasants was the Vendée. Consequently, the conflicts that drove the revolution in Paris, for example, were also lessened in this particularly isolated part of France by the strong adherence of the population to their Catholic faith. In 1791, two representatives on mission informed the National Convention of the disquieting condition of Vendée, and this news was quickly followed by the exposure of a royalist plot organized by the Marquis de la Rouërie. It was not until the social unrest and the fear of the terror combined with the external pressures from the civil constitution of the clergy and the introduction of a levy of 300,000 on the whole of France, decreed by the National Convention in February 1793, that the region erupted. The civil constitution of the clergy required all clerics to swear allegiance to it and, by extension, to the increasingly anti-clerical National Constituent Assembly. All but 7 of the 160 bishops refused the oath, as did about half of the parish priests. Persecution of the clergy and of the faithful was the first trigger of the rebellion, the second being conscription. Non-juring priests were exiled or imprisoned and women on their way to Mass were beaten in the streets. Religious orders were suppressed and church property confiscated. On the 3rd of March 1793, virtually all the churches were ordered closed. Soldiers confiscated sacramental vessels and the people were forbidden to place crosses on graves. Nearly all the purchasers of church land were bourgeois. Very few peasants benefited from the sales. The March 1793 conscription, requiring Vendéens to fill their district's quota of the national total of 300,000, enraged the populace, who took up arms instead, as the Catholic army, a royal, being added later, and fought for, above all, the reopening of their parish churches with their former priests, although town dwellers were more likely to support the revolution in the Vendée. Support for the revolution among the rural peasantry was not unknown. Many lived on monastery properties, and they overwhelmingly embraced the revolution after these lands were seized and redistributed among them by the Republican government. Outbreak of Revolt. There were other levy riots across France when regions started to draft men into the army in response to the levy decree in February. The reaction in the Northwest in early March was particularly pronounced, with large-scale rioting verging on insurrection. By early April, in areas north of the Loire, order had been restored by the revolutionary government. But south of the Loire, in 4 departments that became known as the Vendée militaire, there were few troops to control rebels, and what had started as rioting quickly took on the form of a full insurrection led by priests and the local nobility. Within a few weeks the rebel forces had formed a substantial, if ill-equipped, army, the Royal and Catholic Army, supported by 2,000 irregular cavalry and a few captured artillery pieces. The main force of the rebels operated on a much smaller scale, using guerrilla tactics. Supported by the insurgents' unparalleled local knowledge and the goodwill of the people. Geographic coverage. Geographically, the insurrection occurred within a rough quadrilateral approximately 60 miles wide, with Cholet at its center. The territory defied description in the terms of the redistricting of 1790. Nor did it align itself to descriptors used in the ancient regime. The heart of the movement lay in the forests, with Cholet at its center, in the wild districts of the old county of Anjou, in the Breton marshlands between Montaillou and the sea. It included parts of the old Poitiers and Tours, the départements of Maine-et-Loire, the Vendée, and Deux-Chevres. It never fell completely under control of the insurgents. Vendée military response. The revolt began in earnest in March 1793, as a rejection of the mass conscription. In February, the convention had voted to approve a levy of 300,000 men, to be chosen by lot among the unmarried men in each commune. Thus, the arrival of recruiters reminded locals of the methods of the monarchy, aroused resistance nearly everywhere in the countryside, and set in motion the first serious signs of sedition. For the most part, much of this resistance was quelled quickly, but in the Lower Loire, in the Mauges and in the Vendée Bocage, the situation was more serious and more protracted. Youths from communes surrounding Cholet, a large textile town on the boundary between the two regions, invaded the town and killed the commander of the National Guard, a patriotic manufacturer. Within a week, violence had spread to the Breton marshlands. Peasants overran the town of Macacal on 10-11 March, and several hundred patriots were massacred. A large band of peasants under the leadership of Jacques Catelineau and Jean-Nicolas Stofflet seized Saint-Florent-le-Vieil. On the 19th of March, a band of peasants attacked and scattered small Republic army of about 3,000 men on its way from La Rochelle to Nantes. By mid-March, a minor revolt against conscription had turned into an insurrection. The Republic was quick to respond, dispatching over 45,000 troops to the area. The first pitched battle was on the night of the 19th of March. A Republican column of 2,000, under Fr. Louis-Henri François de Marseille, moving from La Rochelle to Nantes, was intercepted north of Chantonnet at Charot Bridge, near the Laon. After 6 hours of fighting, rebel reinforcements arrived and routed the Republican forces. In the north, on the 22nd of March, another Republican force was routed near Chalonnes-sur-Loire. There followed a series of skirmishes and armed contacts. Battle of Bréchaux on 3 May 1793. Bréchaux fell to Vendée on forces led by La Roche-et-Jacqueline. Battle of Thouars on 5 May 1793. The main clash took place on the Pont d'Ivraine, the bridge over the stream leading into Thouars. The Vendéens proved unable to take the bridge for 6 hours, until Louis-Marie de Lescure showed himself alone on the bridge under enemy fire and encouraged his men to follow him, which they did. Crossing the bridge, the Republicans there were taken from behind by the cavalry under Charles de Bonchamps, which had crossed the river at a ford. Despite the arrival of reinforcements, the Republicans were routed and withdrew towards the city. The insurgents, headed by Henry de la Roche-Jacqueline, took the rampart by force and poured into the city, and the Republican troops quickly capitulated. The Vendéans seized a large amount of arms and gunpowder, but allowed the captured Republican forces to leave, after having sworn to no longer fight in the Vendée and had their hair shaved off so they could be recognized lest they went back on their word and were recaptured. Battle of Fontenay Lecompte, the 25th of May 1793. Fontenay Lecompte. Battle of Somme on the 9th of June 1793. Vendée insurgents commanded by Jacques Catelineau captured the town of Somme from Louis Alexander Berthier. The victory gave the insurgents a massive supply of arms, including 50 cannon. This was the high point of the insurgency. Battle of Nantes. Battle of Châtillon-sur-Sèvre in July 1793. Jean-Baptiste Clergy arrived from Mainz with a veteran army to suppress the rising. At Châtillon-sur-Sèvre, southeast of Cholet, he inflicted one of the first defeats on the insurgents. Battle of Lucan. The Battle of Lucan was actually a series of 3 engagements fought over 4 weeks. The first on the 15th of July and the last on the 14th of August 1793, between Republican forces under Augustin Tuck and Vendée forces. The engagement on the 14th of August, fought near the town of Lucan, was actually the conclusion of 3 engagements between Louis Delbez's Vendée insurgents and the Republican army. On the 15th of July, Claude Sandoz and a garrison of 800 had repulsed 5,000 insurgents led by Delby. On the 28th of July, Tuck drove off a second attempt. 2 weeks later, Tuck and his 5,000 men routed 30,000 insurgents under the personal command of François de Cheratte. Battle of Tiforges. Battle of Montaillou. Battle of Noirmoutier. Battle of Tremblay. Defeat. On the 1st of August 1793, the Committee of Public Safety ordered General Jean-Baptiste Carrier to carry out a pacification of the region by complete physical destruction. These orders were not carried out immediately, but a steady stream of demands for total destruction persisted. Under orders from the Committee of Public Safety in February 1794, the Republican forces launched their final pacification effort. 12 columns, the Colonnes Infernales under Louis-Marie Turreau, marched through the Vendée. General Turreau inquired about the fate of the women and children I will encounter in rebel territory, stating that, if it was necessary to pass them all by sword, he would require a decree. In response, the Committee of Public Safety ordered him to eliminate the brigands to the last man. There is your duty. The Republican army was reinforced, benefiting from the first men of the levée en masse and reinforcements from Mainz. The Vendée army had its first serious defeat of the Battle of Cholet on the 17th of October. Worse for the rebels, their army was split. In October 1793, the main force, commanded by Henry de la Roche-Jacqueline and numbering some 25,000, crossed the Loire, headed for the port of Granville, where they expected to be greeted by a British fleet and an army of exiled French nobles. Arriving at Granville, they found the city surrounded by Republican forces, with no British ships in sight. Their attempts to take the city were unsuccessful. During the retreat, the extended columns fell prey to Republican forces, suffering from hunger and disease. They died in the thousands. The force was defeated in the last decisive Battle of Savigny on the 23rd of December. Among those executed the following day was Lieutenant General Jacques-Alexis de Vertoy. With this came formal orders for forced evacuation. Also, a scorched earth policy was initiated. Farms were destroyed, crops and forests burned and villages razed. There were many reported atrocities and a campaign of mass killing universally targeted at residents of the Vendée regardless of combatant status, political affiliation, age or gender. From January to May 1794, 20,000 to 50,000 Vendéan civilians were massacred by the infernal columns of the General Louis-Marie Turreau. In Anjou, directed by Nicolas Hens and Marie-Pierre Adrien Francastel, Republicans captured 11,000 to 15,000 Vendéans. 6,500 to 7,000 were shot or guillotined and 2,000 to 2,200 prisoners died from disease. General Westermann reported to his political masters at the convention, "The Vendée is no more. According to your orders, I have trampled their children beneath our horses' feet, I have massacred their women, so they will no longer give birth to brigands. I do not have a single prisoner to reproach me. I have exterminated them all." Some historians believe this letter never existed. The rebellion was still going on, and there were several thousand living Vendéan prisoners being held by Westermann's forces when the letter was supposedly written. The killing of civilians would also have been an explicit violation of the convention's orders to Westermann. The convention issued conciliatory proclamations allowing the Vendéans liberty of worship and guaranteeing their property. General Hoche applied these measures with great success. He restored their cattle to the peasants who submitted, let the priests have a few crowns, and on the 20th of July 1795 annihilated an émigré expedition which had been equipped in England and had seized Fort Penthièvre in Quiberon. Treaties were concluded at La Journée and at La Mabelaye, and were fairly well observed by the Vendéans. No obstacle remained but the feeble and scattered remnant of the Vendéans still under arms and the Chouans. On the 30th of July 1796 the state of siege was raised in the western departments. Estimates of those killed in the Vendéan conflict, on both sides, range between 117,000 and 450,000, out of a population of around 800,000. Later revolts. According to Theodore A. Dodge, the war in Vendée lasted with intensity from 1793 to 1799, when it was suppressed but later broke out spasmodically, especially in 1813. 1814 and 1815. During Napoleon's 100 Days in 1815, some of the population of Vendée remained loyal to King Louis XVIII, forcing Napoleon, who was short of troops to fight the Waterloo campaign, to send a force of 10,000 under the command of Jean-Maximilien Lamarck, to pacify the region.